It is titled Focused on What Matters. So for those of you that haven't joined our webinar on the budget before, it is a ton of information. I'm going to speak very, very quickly, try to get through it as fast as possible. It's pretty dense and number heavy. Um, but yeah, I'll be going through it pretty quick. If you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the Q&A. I will probably try to get to them before I move on to a different section. And then there'll be opportunity for questions at the end as well. So if you do have questions, throw them in the chat. If I don't get to your question or if something comes up to you later, feel free to send me an email or anybody on the Alberta Council team and we'll be able to help you out. So the agenda for today is I'm going to go through the strat plan. I'm going to talk a little bit about the revenues and expenses, the capital plan, and then some budget highlights for individual ministries. The government has kind of grouped them into five key areas of strengthening healthcare, investing in education, support for vulnerable Albertans, keep Albertans safe, and sustaining Alberta's growth. So I kind of broke it in and I'm going to talk about some major highlights from each individual ministry at the end there. So Budget 2026 is titled Focused on What Matters. Um, this is very much a kind of maintenance budget. It isn't an exciting budget. It's not a lot of new spending. There's not really any new areas or new programs that are exciting that we can really talk about. This is very much just a continuation of last year's budget in terms of keeping the line as to what programs we are offering as a province, but just increasing the spend. It is a very tough budget for the government in terms of deficits. Resource revenue is quite a bit lower than they would hope for in order to balance the budget. They are also predicting deficits over the next 3 years. So that would be the fourth year in a row, which actually breaks the legislation that Alberta has in having deficits only a maximum of 3 years. Um, the government has been very clear that they will keep the line on spending in terms of education and healthcare, and have actually increased spend in those areas as well as in the capital plan. So we've basically seen an increase in budget line items in virtually, I would say, the most important ministries. Um, and it's resulted in about a $9.4 billion deficit, which we'll get to. So, as part of the budget, what the government has done over the last number of years has also included a strategic plan. The strategic plan this year has got two main priorities. First one is maintaining Alberta's advantage, and the second is supporting Albertans. These are the exact same strategic plan goals as last year. And in fact, the strategic plan in and of itself is almost identical to last year's. So very, very similar. So in the first point in the strat plan, it is maintaining Alberta's advantage. And under this first priority, there are six objectives. So the first one is maintaining Alberta's advantage, growing the Alberta Heritage Trust Fund to secure financial stability and build long-term prosperity for current and future generations of Albertans. Through wise investments, government aims to increase the fund to at least $250 billion by 2050. Maintaining Alberta's tax advantage compared to other provinces for both individuals and businesses. Albertans and Alberta businesses continue to pay the lowest overall taxes when compared to other provinces. For 26-27, Alberta's tax advantage is $16.9 billion lower, or sorry, 16.9 billion. This is lower than in previous years, primarily due to British Columbia's elimination of its carbon tax. Reducing red tape by implementing regulatory and program delivery approaches that ease administrative burden and focus on outcomes. Maintaining a responsible approach to fiscal management by finding efficiencies in program delivery and operations to reduce government spending. Addressing regional disparities in utility rates by conducting a comprehensive review of distribution rates to ensure more equitable electricity distribution costs across the province, which will support both investment and affordability in rural Alberta. I think those tuning in from the north might find that very interesting. Modernizing Alberta's electricity grid and market design to enhance grid reliability and efficiency. The second one is diversifying Alberta's economy and attracting investment. So under this objective, they want to establish a Premier's Investment Council to align relevant ministries and investment agencies on a consolidated approach to investment attraction. Counsel will provide the premier ministers with a clear line of sight on priority investment files, informed by market intelligence, and support coordinated decision-making on investments of strategic importance. Establishing Alberta as a destination of choice for companies to innovate, commercialize, and scale in high-impact sectors through the implementation of the Alberta Technology and Innovation Strategy. Positioning Alberta as a prime destination for international and local data centers through the implementation of the Alberta Artificial Intelligence Data Center Strategy, which aims to enhance access to public data and establish networks of research excellence to support the technology and innovation sector. Also, securing Alberta's place as a key partner for international trade by promoting Alberta's interests on the global stage, building relationships with international markets, while asserting Alberta's priorities and safeguarding provincial jurisdiction in international agreements by implementing the International Agreements Act. Securing a high-impact private sector investments by developing and delivering investment programs, services, data tools, and other resources, including with Invest Alberta. Developing and implementing Alberta's nuclear roadmap and regulatory framework to build confidence and provide industry certainty to enable investment attraction into new nuclear energy projects in the province. Working with industry and key economic development partners to maximize investment by the Government of Canada and the private sector in defense-related infrastructure and the defense industry in Alberta. That's a new objective. Continuing to build a competitive agriculture industry that attracts new investment in value-added processing and it increases exports to markets across Canada and around the world. Government is taking several steps to achieve these goals, including the development of Agriculture First legislation that removes red tape and clears the way for the sector to be more innovative and productive. Ensuring the long-term growth and competitiveness of Alberta's whiskey sector by developing the Alberta Whiskey Act, which defines Alberta whiskey, provides clear standards for production, and enables innovation and stronger brand recognition. Apparently, that legislation is written via AI. No, my slides aren't advancing. I don't have any of this written in slides. This is just notes. They will also be working with Travel Alberta and industry partners to implement higher ground and tourism sector strategy to grow the province's visitor economy to 25 billion in annual visitor expenditures by 2035. Growing Alberta's cultural industries to diversify the economy, create jobs, and secure the province's position as a hub for publishing, music, television, film, and other performing arts. The next objective is connecting Albertans to jobs. I know it's a lot of information, getting through it. Enabling the province to exercise greater control over economic immigration, including utilizing Alberta's allocation through the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program, which allows government to address labor shortages in sectors where the domestic workforce is not sufficient. In 26-27, 16 million is allocated for economic immigration programs and services. Increasing access, removing barriers, and enhancing funding opportunities for mentoring, labor attachment, and other related labor market integration programs for immigrants, newcomers. In 26-27, government is allocating 15 million to workforce-focused grant programs, aligning post-secondary programs with current and emerging labor markets by enhancing education pathways and post-secondary capacity, expanding innovative learning opportunities such as work-integrated learning and apprenticeship learning models to meet Albertan skill needs. In 26-27, 118 million is allocated to increase seats in high-demand post-secondary programs through the existing targeted enrollment expansion programs, and 30 million is allocated to increase seats in high-demand occupations such as healthcare programs. Also, removing barriers to speed up the credential recognition process for workers from provinces with similar standards through implementation of Alberta's Labor Mobility Act, supporting a modern and efficient apprenticeship program. Government is investing 96 million through the apprenticeship learning grant to expand classroom instruction seats across Alberta in response to demand for apprenticeship training. Working with the Alberta Chamber of Commerce to bring talent pipeline management approaches to Alberta. This provides employers and their education and workforce development partners with strategies and tools to co-design talent supply chains. Next one is pursuing the full value of Alberta's natural resources. So this is very similar in defense of the energy sector with the feds. Also, in this one is they want to ensure utility costs remain affordable by modernizing Alberta's power market and transmission policies to help meet growing demand, stabilize utility bills, and strengthen reliability and affordability. Also want to partner with First Nations, Métis settlements, and credibly asserted Métis communities to build oil and gas pipelines and other major development projects across the province. And advance economic diversification by reviewing and updating the mineral strategy and action plan to position Alberta as a preferred producer and supplier of metallic and industrial minerals. Next, securing a sustainable future for Alberta, so modernizing the Water Act, which they introduced in the spring. Also, will be allocating 80 million in capital funding through 28-29 to expand irrigation capacity. And this is part of a $933 million investment between Alberta, the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, and 9 irrigation districts. Continue to advance wildfire mitigation and risk reduction through proactive and strategic forest harvesting, public education, and expanded Fire Smart and Fire Guard programs to ensure the province's forests are managed responsibly. In 26-27, government is investing 169 million to support effective wildfire mitigation and response efforts. They will also be updating and improving Alberta's land use planning approaches and tools with input from stakeholders so plans can be put into action faster. And finally, in this priority is building Alberta. So they'll be investing 4.2 billion in capital maintenance and renewal projects over 3 years, including vital repairs to extend the useful life of government-owned facilities and infrastructure. Strengthening community infrastructure across the province through the capital component of the LGFF. In 26-27, government is allocating almost 800 million through this component to develop, improve, or maintain community infrastructure. Investing 29.3 million through the Strategic Transportation Infrastructure Program. That's the STIP program. They also want to expand direct international flights out of Alberta and support regional air passenger services. And then investing 2.4 billion in provincial funding and 1.1 billion in federal support over 3 years for LRT projects. This includes the construction of Calgary's Green Line from downtown to Shepherd and extension of the Blue Line North and continuing work on the Edmonton West Valley Line and Capital Line South extension. Also investing 275 million over 3 years to build new campsites, upgrade trails, and enhance outdoor recreational opportunities, natural features, and buildings on Crown lands. And wanting to work with municipalities, builders, and local businesses to modernize and streamline the permitting system and related legislation, establishing clear permitting frameworks and automatic approval options to enable faster, more transparent, and efficient decisions. We're expecting legislation on that this spring. Lisa, the fire guard is just that they're spending money in it. The actual dollar amount for fire guard isn't listed, but fire mitigation somewhere it's in here. I'll get back to you, Lisa. In the next priority, this is the second one, the last one. There's 7 objectives. I'll try to get through it quick. I know it's boring. Advancing a modernized healthcare system. So strengthening primary and preventative care through faster and more effective elective testing, screening, diagnostic services, enhanced public health inspections, targeted initiatives to improve immunization rates, and improvements to health benefits administration, including government-sponsored drug plans. Government is implementing phase 2 of the Modernizing Alberta's Primary Healthcare System initiative. They want to embed culturally safe, respectful, and appropriate primary healthcare services for Indigenous people by finalizing the establishment of the Indigenous Advisory Council to provide ongoing strategic guidance. In 26-27, approximately 6.1 million will be allocated to First Nation, Métis, and Inuit communities and organizations through the Indigenous Primary Healthcare Innovation Fund and investments in Indigenous patient navigation, including the placement of patient navigators in emergency departments. Continuing physician training expansion with an emphasis on training physicians to practice in rural communities through the implementation of rural training centers in Lethbridge and Grand Prairie, and increasing access to medical education for learners in rural settings. Continuing implementation of Alberta's midwifery strategy through investments in innovative projects to improve access to maternal care, particularly in rural, remote, and Indigenous communities. Reducing wait times and improving patient flow through emergency department enhancements by improving safe discharge processes and transitions to appropriate alternative settings for post-acute recovery. Increasing the number of surgeries performed through the acute care action plan, improving operator efficiency and accountability through the introduction of an activity-based funding model in 26-27. Improving access to emergency health services by strengthening workforce capacity and resolving operational inefficiencies across the province-wide air and ground ambulance system, supported by $778 million in system-level investments in 26-27 to increase emergency response capacity and performance. Enhancing acute care capacity through a $1.4 billion capital investment in 26-27 that expands hospital and rural facility infrastructure, supporting more resilient system. Modernizing and transforming the continuing care system to improve quality of care and expanding continuing care capacity through the modernization of existing facilities and the creation of new spaces. Providing supports for Alberta's recovering from mental health and addiction. Implementing and operationalizing compassionate intervention legislation to provide timely and effective interventions for people who are likely to cause substantial harm to themselves or others due to their substance abuse or addiction. In 26-27, $42.5 million is allocated for this work. Allocating $318.6 million in capital funding over 3 years to renovate existing facilities and build compassionate intervention centers, including 2 150-bed centers in Edmonton and Calgary, to support implementation of compassionate intervention. Providing access to and supporting the delivery of mental health and addiction services in correctional settings through an allocation of $60.2 million this year. Delivering medical withdrawal management and bed-based addiction treatment services, and enhancing the quality of programming to support Albertans pursuing recovery. In 26-27, $121.1 million is allocated to these services, and then investing $156 million in 26-27 to deliver prevention, intervention, and specialized mental health and addiction services for children and youth in schools and in community to build resiliency and support healthy development. In 26-27, $21.3 million is allocated to build and $52.8 million to operate recovery community facilities across the province, including 5 facilities led by Indigenous communities to provide holistic rehabilitation supports for Albertans pursuing recovery. Next up is providing high-quality childcare, education, and training opportunities for skill development, so building new schools and enhancing existing school infrastructure to meet the increasing demands of growing communities. $4.1 billion in capital investment is allocated over 3 years to maintain, enhance, plan, expand, and build new schools. Mitigating the impact of class sizes and classroom complexity through a data-driven approach to allocating resources and strengthening supports for students and teachers. So a total of $355 million is allocated in 26-27 to address classroom complexity. They also want to improve access to affordable out-of-school care programs for families through income-tested family supports and workforce investments. In 26-27, the ministry will allocate $1.77 billion to support Alberta families to increase access to affordable, high-quality, and inclusive licensed childcare. Also, we'll be strengthening the private career college sector by revising regulations and policies consistent with recent statutory changes and working with operators, industry, and other partners to enhance student protections while also providing opportunities for sustainable development and innovation. Next objective is fostering well-being and safe communities, so implementing the new Alberta Sheriff's Police Service to enhance the safety of Alberta communities with an additional $22 million allocated in 26-27. Also, $56.3 million this year to the Alberta law enforcement response teams that continue to address organized crime, child pornography, gun violence, drug trafficking, human trafficking, and prolific offenders. Supporting victims of crime by allocating $10.5 million this year to the Victim of Crime Assistance Program. And one of the new things, very few new things, is they're developing a new provincial DNA laboratory to strengthen timely, evidence-based, and reliable investigative capability for law enforcement. So there's 5 million in operating capital funding this year for that. And then 36.4 million this year in traffic safety programs. Supporting vulnerable Albertans, removing barriers and providing incentives to build new homes while working with municipal, federal, and industry partners to align housing programs and regulations with housing needs in Alberta. 768 million over 3 years to build, renew, and maintain affordable housing and operate government-supported affordable housing. They're also launching the Alberta Disability Assistance Program that is going to provide financial, medical, and personal supports, as well as pathways to employment for Albertans with disabilities who are able to work. Uh, I haven't done a ton of research on that, but it sounds to me like they're intending to create this new program for people with disabilities that are able to work and to get them off of AISH and instead onto the Alberta Disability Assistance Program. Also providing resources to municipalities and Métis settlements to design and deliver preventive social programs to address key social issues in the communities. This year, 105 million will be invested through FCSS to support this work, which is the same amount as last year. Assisting Albertans in exiting the cycle of homelessness by continuing to implement a provincial housing-focused and recovery-oriented delivery model. This year, 217.5 million is allocated to support homeless shelters, navigation and sports centers, and housing supports programs. And then the Alberta Child and Family Benefit is allocated 405 million this year. Next is forming lasting and meaningful partnerships with First Nation, Métis, and Inuit communities. So we're continuing to enable access to capital via the AILC. We're also allocating more than 179 million this year as part of the First Nations Development Fund to help support First Nations economic, social, and community priorities. This fund is supported by a percentage of revenues from government-owned slot machines operating First Nation casinos in Alberta. Investing 8.3 million this year through the Aboriginal Business Investment Fund. 4 million this year to support training opportunities for Indigenous people in Alberta through the Employment Partnerships Program, and 3.9 million to the Indigenous Reconciliation Initiative. And then last is building better communities. So continuing to support cost-effective municipal service delivery through regional collaboration and intermunicipal collaborative frameworks. Almost 11 million is budgeted this year to support the Alberta Community Partnership Grant Program, so the ACP grant. This is a reduction this year. There will also be 38.1 million this year to the Alberta Foundation for the Arts. 9 million to support community groups, nonprofit organizations, societies, First Nations, and Métis settlements through the Active Communities Initiative. And then CIP and CFIP are going to be 61.4 million this year. So CFIP last year was 50 million. That was a one-time increase, and they're reducing it back to 25 million. So. Okay, that's the strap line. I know a ton of information, got through it. I'm just going to check to see if there's any questions. What was the dollar amount for tourism, campsites, and trails in Crownland? Great question. It was a while ago. I should have read this before. I'm not going to be able to find it quick. There it is. 275 million over 3 years to build new campsites, upgrade trails, and enhance outdoor rec opportunities, natural features, and buildings on Crownlands. Thanks, Justin. Yeah, this is being recorded, so it will be available at albertacouncilnews.com/webinars. This presentation I could send out to. Okay, this is a question that gets into a little bit in the weeds, but that's okay. The question is, would I say the multi-year deficit is the primary driver for the new police funding model downloading costs to the municipalities? The new model is increasing our policing costs by almost 170% over the next 4 years. The discussions I've had with our municipal clients are that that is a major cost driver. I talked to the minister's chief of staff about it on Wednesday night. Long story short, just not to get too into the weeds, it is the RCMP that have determined that cost increase, and the province just had to go with it. Yes, Tina, I can send you my notes. Okay, highlights. Total revenue in 26-27 is forecast at $74.6 billion, a decrease of $0.7 billion from the 25-26 third quarter forecast of $75.3 billion. Total expense in 26-27 is forecast at $83.9 billion, which is an increase of $4.5 billion or 5.6% from the 2025-26 third quarter forecast. The capital plan includes $3.7 billion in capital grants in 26-27, which is an increase of $325 million from last year. Over the following 2 years, capital grants average $3.2 billion annually. Total capital plan for this year is $9.97 billion. Debt servicing costs are forecast to increase by $491 million in this year, from the 25-26 third quarter forecast to a total of $3.4 billion, and then are projected to increase by $1.5 billion by 2029 to $4.9 billion. This growth is due to additional borrowing required to meet cash shortfalls of $16.3 billion this year and another $27.9 billion over the next 2 years to 28-29. Budget 2026 includes definite deficits of $9.4 billion, $7.6 billion, and $6.9 billion over the next 3 years. So, long story short, not a great time. Here's the revenue table. So total revenue in 26-27 is forecast at $74.6 billion. It's a decrease of $0.7 billion from the 25-26 third quarter forecast of $75.3 billion. A forecast decline in oil prices is resulting in a $3.1 billion drop in non-renewable resource revenue. Corporate tax revenue is also expected to decline by $0.1 billion due to persisting trade uncertainty and lower oil prices. In addition, investment income is projected to decline by $0.2 billion, reflecting anticipated lower equity earnings for the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund and endowment funds. This decline is partially offset by a combined $2.7 billion increase in tax revenues, transfers from the Government of Canada, income from government business enterprises, and premiums, fees, and licenses revenue. Total revenue is expected to grow to $78.9 billion in 27-28 and $81.5 billion by 2029, led primarily by income taxes. Non-renewable resource revenue in 26-27 is estimated at $13.2 billion, 18% of total revenue. This is a $3.1 billion decrease from the $16.3 billion forecast for last year due to a combination of lower WTI prices and a wider light-heavy differential. Non-renewable resource revenue is expected to increase to $16.2 billion in 27-28 and $16.9 billion by 2029. WTI is expected to average $60.50 per barrel in 26-27, $1 per barrel lower than in 25-26, then recover to $67.50 by 2029. The light-heavy differential is anticipated to widen to approximately $13 per barrel, and then increase to $14.30 by 2029. Natural gas and byproduct royalties are estimated at $0.9 billion this year, $0.2 billion higher than forecast in 25-26, and are forecast to increase to $1 billion in 27-28 and to $1.1 billion in 2029. Tax revenue is forecast at $30.5 billion in 26-27, representing 41% of total revenue and $1.7 billion higher than the 25-26 forecast. Personal income tax revenue is set to increase $1.2 billion from last year, while corporate income tax revenue is expected to decrease by $0.1 billion. Other tax revenue, mainly as a result of increased education property tax, is forecast to increase $0.6 billion. So education property tax revenue is forecast at $3.6 billion, an increase in 26-27 from the budget 2025 target and forecast. As reflected in budget 2025, education property tax will be increased to cover 1/3 of education and childcare's education-related operating expense target, which is increasing 7.2% from the 25-26 forecast. So the Property tax rates will increase in 2026 to $2.84 per $1,000 of equalized assessment for residential and farmland properties, and to $4.17 per thousand of equalized assessment for non-res properties. In subsequent years, education property tax revenue increases to 3.8 billion in 27-28 and 2029 to align with the targeted share of education-related expense. Tourism levy revenue is projected to be 200 million in 26-27 and then maintain steady revenue growth, reaching 214 million by 2029. The increase in 26-27 reflects the implementation of the 6% tourism levy rate, up from 4%, effective April 1st, 2026. Other tax revenue also includes 102 million from the data center levy effective 28-29. And then Budget 2026 introduces the new vehicle rental tax, establishing a 6% levy on passenger vehicle rentals picked up in Alberta with expected implementation date of January 1st, 2027. In 2027-28, the first full year of implementation, the tax is expected to raise $36 million. It's revenue. So I always kind of include this slide. So this is the energy and economic assumptions. Also, it talks about GDP growth, population growth, and things like that. So Alberta's economy is set to grow at a slower pace in 2026 amid a downshift in population growth and ongoing trade uncertainty. GDP is forecast to rise 1.8% this year, down from an estimated 2.2% in 25. A sharp slowdown in population growth is expected to dampen consumer spending and residential construction activity. Although stable inflation and supportive interest rates will act as tailwinds, sentiment and business investment will continue to be weighed down by lingering trade-related uncertainty, particularly in the first half of this year. The ongoing impacts of tariffs will also be felt in the manufacturing sector, which is expected to see a slow recovery after last year's decline. Businesses are increasingly expanding into new export markets and restructuring supply chains, helping to mitigate some of the impact of higher U.S. tariffs. At the same time, slower population growth will help relieve pressure in the labor market, contributing to more balanced conditions. While GDP growth is expected to slow, Alberta's economy is still forecast to perform better than the rest of the country. The energy sector will provide a needed boost as oil production and exports continue to expand. The Budget 2026 outlook assumes that tariffs in place as of January 14, 2026 remain unchanged over the forecast horizon. Um, Typically in the past, uh, I think I'm fairly conservative in their assumptions in terms of the WTI price, as well as the differential. This year, they're not as conservative as they have been in past years. I think last year they were below the average prediction, and then this year they're quite a bit higher than the average prediction. And so what that means is that I have to find this chart, but essentially what it means is that for every dollar if I find it quick, is every dollar the place. I'm not gonna be able to find it. There's nothing there. I'm not gonna be able to find it. Where am I? Sorry, trying to find this quick. There it is. Thank you. So oil price for every dollar it goes down, it's a $680 million impact to our budget. For every dollar increase in the differential is $670 million. Also, what I found super interesting was that for every cent the exchange rate goes up, we lose $440 million, which is actually kind of crazy to me. And then interest rate. So every percentage interest rate it increases is about a $442 million hit to the budget. So these energy and economic assumptions are super critical to the future revenue projections. This is the expense table. So total expense in 26-27 is forecast at 83.9 billion, an increase of 4.5 billion or 5.6% from the 2025-26 third quarter forecast. Expense grows to 88.4 billion by 2029, or an average of 2.7% per year. Operating expenses estimated at $70.4 billion, 83.9% of total expense. This is an increase of 3.4 billion or 5% from the 2025-26 third quarter forecast. Operating expense growth is 74.1 billion by 28-29, rising by 3.7 billion, an average of 2.6% per year. Increases are mainly focused on health and education. Capital plan includes 3.7 billion in capital grants in 26-27, an increase of 325 million for 25-26. For the following 2 years, capital grants averaged $3.2 billion annually. So I'm going to get into the capital plan just a little bit. I'm not going to touch on every single project that's in there, but I do cover quite a bit. So the budget 2026 capital plan focuses on building communities and maintaining important public infrastructure that supports families and businesses. Government is investing to expand capacity in the education and healthcare systems, support skills development and training, build roads and bridges to support economic activity, and spur private investment and growth. This capital plan allocates 28.3 billion over the next 3 years, which is a 2.2 billion increase from budget 2025. It provides funding for public infrastructure facing capacity pressures, including schools and healthcare facilities. Funding also supports investment in Alberta's growth, enabling opportunities for private sector participation and supporting over 31,000 direct jobs and 14,500 indirect jobs annually through 2028-29. So some highlights, and by some I mean a lot of highlights. 4.9 billion for health infrastructure, 1.3 billion more than budget 2025. 3.3 billion for education infrastructure, which is an increase of 712 million. This investment supports planning, design, and construction of about 160 school projects. 7.1 billion in municipal infrastructure support, 4.2 billion, which is an increase of 454 million from budget 2025, and capital maintenance renewal. 1.1 billion for social infrastructure supports, 2.7 billion for Highway 20 expansion and other projects, 785 million for the development, expansion, and modernization of post-secondary institutions, and 504 million to support public safety and emergency preparedness and response. So here's some health-related updates. 4.9 billion over 3 years, including 63 million for developing shelled and vacant spaces in existing hospitals and 39 million for urgent care centers. Funding is also allocated to continue planning for larger projects, including 7 million for planning the inpatient towers at Grey Nuns and Misericordia community hospitals, 5 million to support the Royal Alexandra Hospital redevelopment planning, and 38 million for the Stollard. Also, existing projects that are underway, so 1 billion for the Red Deer Regional Hospital Center redevelopment, 923 million for the Continuing Care Capital Program, 330 million for the Medical Device Reprocessing Upgrades Program, 319 million for Compassionate Intervention Centers, and 284 million for the Alberta Surgical Initiative Capital Program. Some other highlights are 280 million over the next 3 years, including 149 million in new funding for the Diagnostic Imaging Enhancement Program, 74 million over the next 3 years for the Cardston Health Center Replacement Project. The new hospital will replace one of Alberta's oldest hospitals. It was built in 1959. 60 million for the Laboratory Services Enhancement Program to upgrade laboratory diagnostic equipment, expand capacity, and add artificial intelligence and integration technology to improve patient services. 60 million over the next 2 years, including 50 million in new funding for the Rural Hospital Enhancement Program. Budget 2026 allocates 3.3 billion over 3 years for kindergarten to grade 12 schools, an increase of 712 million. 600 million over the next 3 years for the modular classroom program, 110 million, including 44 million in new funding to support the planning and design of 30 new school projects and the replacement and modernization of an additional 10 schools, including a charter school. It'll be about 30,000 new and modernized spaces, and then 90 million in capital funding for independent schools. Budget 2026 allocates 7.1 billion over the next 3 years, or 25% of the total capital plan towards municipal infrastructure support. Some highlights is 39 million over the next 3 years for site servicing to accommodate development of the Innovation Park in Beaumont, including a training facility to be developed by the Alberta Motor Transport Association. 66 million over 2 years, starting in 27-28, to replace the Smith Bridge that spans the Athabasca River. Capital plan includes 2.8 billion over the next 3 years for municipal transportation programs such as STIP. The capital plan allocates 443 million over the next 3 years for supporting small and mid-sized municipalities to build or enhance water and wastewater infrastructure. It's also 1.1 billion over the next 3 years to enhance affordable housing and social supports across the province. Combined with CMR funding, family, social supports, and housing has nearly 1.3 billion in funding, including 768 million for the Affordable Housing Partnership Program, 150 million for the Lodge Modernization Program, 75 million for the Indigenous Housing Capital Program, 2.2 million in 28-29 towards replacement of four group homes for children and youth in care, and 4 million over the next 3 years in new funding to upgrade women's shelters in Alberta. Roads and bridges, 2.7 billion over the next 3 years to develop provincially owned roadways, including funding for the following projects. 152 million for Highway 3 twinning, which is from Seven Persons to Medicine Hat. 50 million for replacing the Highway 33 bridge over the Athabasca River near Fort Assiniboine. 193 million includes 40 million in new funding for the design of road networks within multiple engineering projects, including Highway 16, 6 to 8 lane conversion, Spruce Grove to west of Edmonton, Highway 40 twinning Canfor Road to Township Road 700 in the Grand Prairie region, Highway 63 twinning Grasslands to Edmonton. Some of the transportation projects currently underway include 160 million for Highway 60 capital improvements, 106 million for Highway 63 twinning north of Fort Mac, just south of Mildred Lake to Peter Loughy Bridge on the Athabasca River, and 81 million for Highway 40 grade widening between Grand Cache and Hinton. In central and southern Alberta, some of the transportation projects currently underway include 279 million for Highway 11 twinning from Red Deer West to Rocky Mountain House, 266 million for Deerfoot Trail upgrades, 146 million for Highway 2 Balzac interchange replacement, and 65 million for Highway 1A upgrades near Stoney First Nation. For Skills for Jobs, there's 384 million over 3 years towards a 560 million dollar total investment for the NATE Advanced Skills Center, 160 million for the development of the multidisciplinary hub at the University of Calgary for enhancing research, 35 million for the development of University of Lethbridge's Rural Medical Teaching School, 7 million for the Lakeland College Beef Yard upgrade and expansion horse pen relocation, 5 million to support planning for the healthcare program expansion at Bow Valley College, and 2 million for planning the Center for Community Wellness at Medicine Hat College. And then for 504 million over 3 years to support projects and programs to protect Albertans, including 103 million for flood mitigation projects and 38 million for wildfire management projects. It also allocates 344 million over 3 years for justice enforcement and correctional facilities, including 124 million for developing a new facility for the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in Edmonton, 67 million for the Court of Appeal facility in Calgary, 5 million for the Provincial Forensic DNA Laboratory, and 9 million to establish permanent offices for the Police Review Commission in Edmonton and Calgary. Under Art, Sports, and Rec, 75 million over 3 years for the CFET program, 40 million over 3 years for the new campgrounds development program. Some of the other things that I found in there was 4 million over 3 years to rehabilitate the Cooking Lake Airport, 138 million over 3 years to improve Highway 881 safety and roadway improvements, and 5 million over 2 years to build a permanent roadside pullout for the Cold Lake Watercraft Inspection Station. That's it. Capital plan highlights. There's a question about that this webinar is being recorded. Is there somewhere where you can access the breakdown of the budget and exactly how much is allocated for each area? That's a complicated question. Putting this webinar together, I went through the entire budget. So there's the fiscal plan, the strat plan, government estimates, and ministry business plans. So the information is available, um, and this is all listed in government documents. Um, I might need more information as to what you're after, just because, I mean, yes, it's listed, but you're gonna have to go through the budget. Part of the income gap has been attributed to the tax advantage of the province. What has the government signaled regarding tax collection future and the likelihood of introducing increases to the taxes collected provincially? Um, it's a good question. They have indicated that they are not increasing taxes. So last year, they actually introduced a new tax bracket, which has resulted in everybody's provincial taxes going down. In the budget address, the Minister of Finance referenced that and referenced the fact that even though we're in a really difficult situation, that tax cut was kept. So, given that next year is an election year, I can't imagine that there would be much appetite to increase the provincial tax um, next year. I know he was asked a question about PST by the media yesterday as well, and basically that like it would create new options for him, but it's not something that they're considering. Yes, they're not increasing income taxes. They are increasing their portion of property taxes, as they indicated last year that they are intending to increase the level of education property tax to fund the operation expense of education to 30%. So yes, as I mentioned earlier, it's about a 7% increase in the increased education tax, but income taxes aren't going up. Okay, highlights. So this is the last section. I'm going to go through these five areas: strengthening healthcare, investing in education, support for vulnerable Albertans, keeping Albertans safe, and sustaining Alberta's growth, and talk about some of the expenditures in each of these areas. First up is strengthening healthcare. So the refocusing of the health system is ongoing, and the four provincial agencies have been stood up. Total budget for the health system is at 34.4 billion, which is an increase of 4.2 billion from last year. Hospital and surgical health services deliver acute care services to Albertans, including hospital care, surgical procedures, emergency services, cancer care, and organ and tissue donation and transplantation. Total expense is 13.8 billion, an increase of 830 million from the 25-26 third quarter forecast, and then grows another 1.3 billion to 15.1 by 28-29, and an average increase of 5.1% per year. Emergency health services expense is increasing to 804 million in 26-27 in the following 2 years for improved ambulance deployment and rural staffing. To further address surgical wait lists and prioritize those waiting longer than clinically recommended timelines, 525 million has been added to increase the number of surgeries performed over the next 3 years by 50,000. Cancer Care Alberta's budget has been increased by 223 million over the next 3 years to expand the cancer care workforce and clinical capacity, improve and expand access to cancer care support services, and increase spaces at the Cross Cancer Institute. Primary and preventative health services is responsible for Alberta's primary care system, supporting community-based health services, administering major health benefit programs, and working to provide Albertans with access to high-quality care close to home and supporting population health. Total expense in 26-27 is 12.7 billion, which is an increase of 409 million from the third quarter forecast. Total expense increases by 1.4 billion, or an average of 5.6% per year, to 14.1 billion by 28-29, primarily due to increases for physician compensation and development and drug costs. They're investing 87 million over the next 3 years to expand the role of nurse practitioners as part of the solution to strengthen primary healthcare and give Albertans greater access. Growth in drugs and supplemental health benefits expense continues in 26-27, with the budget increasing to $2.2 billion. Total expense for mental health and addictions this year is $2 billion, which is an increase of 167 million, or 8.9% from last year's forecast. This increase is primarily due to implementing the Compassionate Intervention Act and Acute Care Action Plan, growth and recovery Alberta services, operating recovery communities, and for collective bargaining. Total expense increases by 53 million to 2.1 billion by 28-29, which is a 2.6% increase. Community care and treatment services budget is 823 million, including 33 million for compassionate intervention and recovery Alberta. Assisted Living Alberta is a new provincial health agency overseen by the Ministry of Assisted Living and Social Services that provides continuing care services. Their operating expenses 5.2 billion this year, which is an increase of 251 million or 5.1% from last year, and grows a further 313 million by 28-29. 152 million for continuing care initiatives and 146 million for continuing care capacity in alternate level of care initiatives to help patients transition from hospital to appropriate continuing care settings. Investing in education. So education and childcare provides leadership, direction, oversight, and the delivery of student-centered early childhood services to grade 12 education. Education and childcare is strengthening the education system by hiring more teachers and support staff, improving classroom conditions, and opening more schools. Also working with the federal government to develop an Alberta-designed childcare system. Education and childcare's total expense in 2026-27 is 13.5 billion, which is an increase of 963 million, or 7.7% from 25-26, and increases by 114 million to 13.6 billion by 28-29, which is a 0.8% increase. Childcare expense is 2.1 billion this year. Education system operating expense is 10.8 billion in 26-27, which is an increase of 722 million, or 7.2% from the 25-26 forecast. Expense then increases by 768 million, or an average of 3.5% per year, to 11.5 billion by 2029. Enrollment growth is funded with increases of nearly 560 million over the next 3 years to allow school authorities to hire teachers. 1.8 billion has been budgeted this year, which is an increase of 86.5 million for students through specialized learning sports, program unit funding, English as an additional language, refugee students, and First Nation Métis and Inuit students. Funding for class size and complexity is 355 million this year and 1.4 billion over 26-27 to 28-29, which will support hiring 1,500 more education assistants and 3,000 more teachers over the next 3 years. Advanced education, total expenses 26-27 is 7.7 billion, an increase of 63 million or 0.8% from last year's forecast. Operating expenses 7.1 billion, which is an increase of 55 million, primarily for more seats to address apprenticeship and other high demand occupation needs and volume and inflationary pressures, partially offset by lower forecast amortization and student aid expense. Demand for apprenticeship seats remain high, with registered apprentices and skilled trades reaching a record of more than 78,000. A total of 96 million is committed through the apprenticeship learning grant to support increased demand. 148 million over 3 years will be invested in new target enrollment expansion initiatives, including funding for new seats in graduate and undergraduate engineering programs, as well as in programs supporting critical workforce needs in healthcare and education. More spaces for healthcare aides, nursing programs, and nurse practitioners will be funded to support expansion of the health workforce. In education and childcare, additional spaces will be funded for early childhood assistance and teachers' assistants. These initiatives are expected to add over 4,000 new spaces in post-secondary institutions across the province. There's also 83 million over 3 years to support doubling enrollment in the University of Calgary Faculty of Veterinary Medicine by 2020. Almost there. We're getting there. Support for vulnerable Albertans. So Children and Family Services supports children, youth, and families, including programs for youth transitioning to adulthood and investments in community groups who work to prevent and address family and sexual violence and abuse. Total expenses 1.7, which is an increase of 63 million or 3.9% from last year's forecast. The Alberta Child and Family Benefit is budgeted at 405 million this year, which is an increase of 30 million or 8%, reflecting population growth. a 2% escalator to benefit rates, and higher phase-out income thresholds. Child intervention services are delivered to protect children and youth from abuse and neglect and include home-based care, facility-based care, private guardianship and adoption. Child intervention funding increases by 31 million to over 1 billion this year, primarily to support public sector compensation and to implement the new child intervention practitioner classification. Funding for women's shelters is 62 million. Assisted living and social services supports the safety and well-being of seniors, people with disabilities, and vulnerable Albertans facing homelessness or in need of temporary help. Total expense is 12.2 billion, which is an increase of 693 million or 6%. Non-health related services account for 6.4 billion of total expense. So it's an increase of 197 million from 25-26 in anticipation of projected caseload growth. Health-related assisted living and continuing care services account for 5.9 billion of total expense, which is an increase of 495 million, primarily due to compensation increases within assisted living Alberta. On July 1st, 2026, the new Alberta Disability Assistance Program will start, and disability income assistance applicants will be assessed for both ADAP and AISH and placed in the program best suited to their unique situation. So Albertans on the Alberta Disability Assistance Program will have access to the resources and tools they need to gain skills and work to their full potential, while those permanently unable to work will continue to receive the same benefits under AISH. The maximum benefit rate for the Alberta Disability Assistance Program will be set at $1,740 per month. Clients who transition from AISH to ADAP will receive a transition benefit of $200 per month, maintaining the maximum total benefit at the same level as AISH until December 31st, 2027. As with AISH, ADAP benefit rates will be subject to the Alberta escalator policy annually, and former ADAP clients will continue to receive ongoing health benefits until age 65, regardless of employment income. Keeping Albertans safe. So public safety and emergency services is responsible for keeping Alberta communities safe and secure and assists with disaster and emergency preparations and activities. Total expenses 1.5 billion, which is an increase of 60 million or 4%. Increases include 37 million for public sector compensation, 39 million for police support, 5 million for the expansion of the Police Review Commission, 3 million for combating human trafficking, and a 16 million capital grant for the safety campus in the city of Beaumont. Total expense grows by a further 8 million by 28-29, mainly due to Alberta Sheriff's Police Service funding. Public security operating expenses $866 million, which is an increase of 39 million, driven mainly by investments in law enforcement across the province, including a 24 million for the continued implementation of the ASPS and the establishment of a provincial DNA lab. Correctional service operating expenses 397 million, an increase of 34 million, which includes additional funding to expand Alberta's electronic monitoring program. The Alberta Emergency Management Agency operating expenses 91 million, 5 million higher than last year. The newly formed Police Review Commission has an operating expense of 26 million this year. In terms of justice, the total expense is 773 million, up 22 million or 2.9%. Increase is mainly a result of 19 million for public sector compensation and 3 million for Legal Aid Alberta. Total expense decreases by 15 million to 758 million by 28-29, reflecting a $21 million reduction in federal funding for legal aid services and the gender-based violence strategy. Operating expense for court and justice services is 288 million, an increase of 2 million. Alberta Crown Prosecution Services operating expense is 163, an increase of 9 million from the 25-26 forecast. Sustaining Alberta's growth. Jobs, economy, trade, and immigration works to enhance Alberta's competitive advantage. Total expense is 422 million, a decrease of 38 million or 8% from the 25-26 forecast, primarily from a $35 million reduction to the film and television tax credit, one-time funding of 27 million in 25-26 to support the Alberta Training Center of Excellence for Aviation and Aerospace, $10 million with the conclusion of the Alberta is Calling Moving bonus, and reductions of 2 million in ethnocultural grants and 2 million for the Invest Alberta Corporation. These decreases are partially offset by increases of 14 million for employer and youth-focused workforce initiatives, 13 million for the Investment Growth Fund, 6 million for public sector compensation, 2 million for the Appeals Commission's Advisory Office, and $2 million for the Heroes Fund. Total expense decreases by 22 million to 399 million by 2029, or 5%, mainly due to the conclusion of the Federal Labor Market Agreement for Tariff Workforce Supports and the Coal Workforce Transition Program. And this year, 149 million in operating expenses allocated to support investment attraction, foster regional economic development, and enhance internal and international trade, including 60 million for the film and television tax credit, 28 million for the Investment and Growth Fund, and 15 million for Invest Alberta. Workplace safety is supported through 81 million for labor relations, occupational health and safety and employment standards, and 20 million is allocated to support multicultural and newcomer supports. Ag and irrigation is 963 million, which is a decrease of 741 million, or 43% from the last year's forecast, primarily due to 705 million in disaster and emergency response expense that does not continue this year. The remaining decreases of 36 million include 20 million in reduced moisture deficiency insurance, 11 million in lower bad debt provisions, and 4 million transferred to capital investment. Total expenses decreased by another 47 million by 2029, which is a 4.8% decrease due to decreases of 55 million in capital grants, 6 million in reinsurance costs, and 1 million in amortization. But it will be offset by increases of 13 million for support to ag producers and 2 million for public sector compensation. For Indigenous relations, total expenses in 26-27 is 268 million, which is an increase of $11 million, or 4.5% from the 25-26 third quarter forecast. Increases include 12 million in iGaming revenue and 8 million of on-reserve casino gaming revenue. Increases are partially offset by a decrease of 6 million in capital grants due to project completion in 25-26 and a decrease of 4 million in the Métis Settlements Appeal Tribunal program due to one-time funding in 25-26. Okay, I'm almost there. This is my last slide. Total expense for municipal affairs is 1.4 billion, which is a decrease of 18 million, or 1% from 25-26. Decreases of 24 million in the LGFF and ACP grants, 16 million in federally funded capital programs, 15 million from the conclusion of the Calgary Event Center project, and 3 million for the Jasper Revenue Stabilization payment in 25-26 are partially offset by a $20 million increase for grants in place of taxes to restore the grants to 100% of the eligible tax amount, 13 million for the Edmonton Event Park, and a net 7 million for public sector compensation. Total expense increases by 110 million to 1.5 billion by 28-29, representing an 8% increase, primarily due to a $96 million increase in the LGFF capital grants, 13 million for the final year of the Edmonton Event Park project, 11 million in federally funded capital grants, and 4 million for growth in the grants in places of taxes program. Total expense for transportation in 26-27 is 3.1 billion, which is an increase of 463 million, or 18%, mainly due to a $446 million increase in capital grants, primarily for the Edmonton and Calgary light rail transit projects, a $40 million increase in amortization expense based on current and forecast capital assets, and 6 million for public sector comp, partially offset by decreases of 24 million, primarily due to commercial driver training grants ending, and 4 million in lower debt servicing costs. Total expense decreases by 640 million to 2.5 billion by 28-29, primarily as a result of a 734 million decline in capital grants due to anticipated construction progress and completion of municipal infrastructure projects funded by the federal government and provincial funding for municipal projects for water infrastructure and transit and transportation, as well as 8 million in lower debt servicing costs and 4 million from the conclusion of the airport gateway strategy. Total expense for infrastructure is 961 million, which is an increase of 54 million, or 6%, primarily from a $30 million increase to demolish the former Royal Alberta Museum, 10 million for the Edmonton Downtown and Coliseum site improvements, 10 million for increased amortization expense, and 5 million for public sector comp. Total expense decreases by 44 million to 918 million by 2029 from finishing the demolition of the former Royal Alberta Museum, closing the Swan Hills Treatment Center, uh, and conclusion of a one-time expense in 26-27. And that's partially offset by a net $11 million increase for the Edmonton Downtown project and public sector call. Okay, tons of info. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat now. Could I speak to the $4 million transfer to capital investment for software development under AGI expenditure? Come on, Beyond, you know that the budget doesn't include that level of detail. I can't give you any information about that. RDAR is not flat. It is a decrease. You give me a sec, I will pull up the actual decrease. I don't have it. Rural programming and ag societies is decreasing by almost $4 million this year. It doesn't break it down into RDAR though. Does anybody have any other questions? I mentioned this will be made available online. Can you remind us where? Yes. So if you go to albertacouncilnews.com/webinars, it is all of our webinars are available there. And this one will be posted probably by the end of the day. Do I have any insights into what expenses would have been covered in an emergency and disaster expenses for ag? It likely has to do with drought, flooding, and fire. But no, I don't have the exact projects or locations that that funding would have went to. Beyond, I don't know what that stands for. Also, why don't you just message to me? Um, if anybody has any other questions that we didn't get to, or you need some more detailed information, feel free to send me an email, or anybody on the Alberta Council team, and we would do our best to get you some information. The Whiskey Act piece was in the strat plan. Somewhere in the strat plan. Um, the Whiskey Act piece is on page 9 of the strategic plan. That's the only place I saw it in the budget. But one of my colleagues said that that legislation is being written with artificial intelligence. So that's interesting. Cool. If nobody has any other questions, I'm going to end it here. Thanks everybody for joining us today. Sorry, it's a ton of information, I know. But yeah, have a great weekend and enjoy the rest of your day.